propagation of the cult of the self, which is at the core of consumer society. The cult of the self. Qualities that are celebrated in the cult of the self are antithetical to a moral life and to a society built on justice. The cult of the self. It's self-aggrandizement, it's manipulation, it's a penchant for lying, it's an incapacity for remorse or empathy, and it is the belief that you can do anything or anything is justified for your own personal advancement. The cult of the self. Those qualities are often celebrated within the society, whether it's achieving celebrity status or wealth or political power. Once that position is achieved, then all of the nefarious methods that were used to arrive at that point are tacitly justified. And I would argue that these are the values of corporations as well. Social media is not about communication, it's not about truth, it's not about building friendships, it's not about building community. It is really a form of self-presentation. And it has had an extremely negative effect in terms of social, political, and moral terms within American culture. The cult of the self. When it becomes the dominant ethic of a society, then you build social structures that become predatory against both human beings and the natural world, which is what we have done. Corporations function as totalitarian systems. You can be punished, and there's a corporate mindset that essentially forces you, no matter what your moral stance is, to conform to the very dark ethic of corporate power, which is, again, about exploitation. Reducing the cost of production, which usually means subjugating and impoverishing labor, and increasing profit. The very ecosystem on which we depend for life in the hands of Chevron or ExxonMobil or BP or any of these corporations. So in internal studies, we're well aware of the effects of climate change. But of course, nothing is done because it is about the primacy of profit and the primacy of exploitation, of the cult of the self. There's a deforming of society, ethically, morally, to kind of fit within this particular structure. It is ultimately the way it's fueled is it's all about the celebration of us at the expense of everyone else. The cult of the self. Paul Tillich once said, there aren't any atheists. Everybody has a God. It just depends which one you worship. Some people worship the idols of greed or power. He asks, what is your ultimate concern? So if your ultimate concern is yourself, if you have spent your life building a monument to yourself, then in biblical terms, that's idolatry. And I think we live in an idolatrous society because we are encouraged to build little monuments to ourselves at the expense of others. The prerequisite is social isolation because those people are tempted into a foe or a false community built around an ideology, even an ideology of hatred. And if they pay fealty to that ideology of hatred, then they are embraced. But of course, the moment they question that ideology of hatred, they become pariahs and outcasts. It celebrates communal or collective thinking, again, hierarchical, the cult of the self. And in many of these megachurches, they function as cults. And that when those social bonds are destroyed, that then people begin to act out in ways that are self-destructive. It's about self-annihilation. So exclude the erosion of the media into now forms of entertainment. And I They silo the media to cater to a particular demographic. They tell that demographic what it wants to hear. And then the flip side of that is they demonize the other demographic. That's the left and the right. So there's a breakdown in terms of an ability to communicate. When it becomes the dominant ethic of a society, then you build social structures that become predatory against both human beings and the natural world, which is what we have done. Corporations function as totalitarian systems. You can be punished, and there's a corporate mindset that essentially forces you, no matter what your moral stance is, to conform to the very dark ethic of corporate power, which is, again, about exploitation. Social media is not about communication. It's not about truth. It's not about building friendships. It's not about building community. It is really a form of self-presentation, of the cult of the self,